Hi, all of you wonderful scuba divers out there. Welcome to the Scuba Diver Magazine podcast, where I break down the latest scuba diving news and things that have piqued my underwater interest over the previous week. This week, a very sad story where a son loses his father on a dive only weeks after losing his mother to cancer. A study on coral reef restoration has found a new way to speed up coral growth, and by identifying the guns of a shipwreck that was found over 30 years ago, they have managed to identify the shipwreck itself. So onto the first news story this week, which is a tragic story. A scuba diver has died off Florida's east coast whilst reef diving from a boat with his 14-year-old son. Finding himself in difficulties on the seabed shortly after descending, Kenneth Lowry had, according to a family member, pushed his son Xander, who had been trying to help him, to ascend alone. The teenager had gone up dangerously fast in his anxiety to raise the alarm, but was later said to have recovered after being treated for decompression illness. Only 3 weeks earlier, he had lost his mother, Lowry's ex-wife, when she had died of cancer. According to relatives, it had become an annual tradition over the past 6 years for Kenneth, who had been trained to become a diving instructor, to visit Florida from Texas with his son so that they could dive together. They had been on the charter boat the Republic 4 with Jupiter Dive Center on the 13th of March, leaving Jupiter at 9 a.m. and heading for a popular dive site called Captain Mike's. Lying about 10 kilometers off Juno Beach, the site is described by the center as one of the most spectacular local reefs, ranging in depth from about 20 to 30 meters. The divers had entered the water at 9:50 a.m, with Xander Lowry resurfacing minutes later and calling for help. He told the crew that he had last seen his father laying on the seabed with his regulator out. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission officers had responded rapidly to the subsequent missing diver call, and Lowry's body was later found after what was described as an extensive search at about 11:30 a.m. The police are investigating the cause of death. So just an awful news story, and tragic for the boy. I believe he had another son as well, which is obviously tragic news for both of them, to lose both parents. And there's such little information. We don't know yet what exactly happens. He was trained to become a diving instructor, so he was relatively experienced. We just don't know yet. On some lighter news, planting new coral on degraded reefs can lead to recovery so rapid that the restored reefs end up growing as fast as healthy reefs after just 4 years, according to a new international research team led by the UK's University of Exeter. So the study was based in Indonesia at a site where blast fishing destroyed large areas of the reef 30 to 40 years ago, and it has shown no signs of recovery before the human intervention. The Mars Coral Reef Restoration Program is designed to restore degraded reefs by transplanting coral fragments onto a network of interconnected sand-coated steel frames known as reef stars. I've spoken about them before on the podcast. The Exeter researchers studied the reefs to assess whether the important ecosystem functions of a healthy reef could be restored in collaboration with the Research Centre for Oceanography, Indonesia's National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN, and Mars Sustainable Solutions, as well as Lancaster University. Quote, "The speed of recovery we saw is incredible," said the lead author, Dr. Ins Lang of Exeter. Quoting, "While reef restoration cannot solve the problem that reefs are severely threatened by climate change, it shows that active management actions can help to boost the resilience of specific reefs and bring back important functions that are critical for marine life and local communities." The Exeter researchers developed a means of monitoring reef carbonate budgets, the net production or erosion of a reef over time, as a way of predicting its ability to grow, keep up up with sea level rises, protect coastlines from storms, and provide a habitat for reef animals. To evaluate if and how fast these reef functions return after coral restoration, the carbonate budgets were measured at Mars reef sites that have been restored for a few months or over 1, 2, or even 4 years, as well as on degraded and healthy control sites. In the years following coral transplantation, the level of cover, the colony sizes, and carbonate production rates tripled. After only 4 years, restoration sites were indistinguishable from nearby healthy reefs in every measured respect. This meant that the restored reefs were not only growing at the same speed as the healthy reefs, but providing similar habitat for marine life and efficiently protecting the adjacent island from wave energy and erosion. Transplanted coral fragments are just a mixture of different types of branching corals, so the composition on restoration sites is different from that on normal healthy reefs, which also harbour many boulder-like and encrusting corals. This could affect habitat provision for larger marine species and resilience to future heat waves, because branching corals are a bit more sensitive to bleaching. Quoting, "This is a really encouraging discovery," commented Lancaster University's Dr. Tim Lamont, who initiated the collaboration. Quoting, "If we can maintain climate conditions that allow for coral survival, it's possible to restore even very damaged reefs back to healthy, functional systems within relatively short periods of time." The study itself is published in Current Biology, but it is fantastic news that as long as you put a fair amount of time and effort into specific coral reefs, you can nurture them back into like a healthy status. And yeah, blast fishing is where they basically throw in some explosives, and the barotrauma in the localized area when it goes off underwater kills or stuns or damages enough fish that they just float up to the surface, and then the fishermen just sort of collect it. It's very frowned upon in most areas nowadays for obvious reasons, but some areas still do it. I was diving in one dive site in the Philippines, and they sank a statue of Mary. Because the local islanders were very religious. They sank it, but they didn't quite tell them exactly where it was to try and put off them, because of course they don't want to blow up their holy the Holy Mary or whatever. So yeah, that's one way of getting around it. It's like to try and prevent like trawler nets. They throw in big boulders because it just catches on the nets and ruins them. So yeah, but it's nice to see these kind of studies coming out, basically saying that given enough like time and attention, after 4 years or so, the coral does start to come back like really strong. So yeah, a nice news story there. And a shipwreck discovered in the Dry Tortugas National Park west of the Florida Keys had long been suspected to be a 17th century built British warship, and now its identity has finally been proven by a team of archaeological divers. The 50-gun ship of the line HMS Tiger was in naval service for almost a century. It was a 39-metre-long frigate. It was built in 1647, but met its end in 1742 after running aground on the Dry Tortugas Reef during the War of Jenkins' Ear between Britain and Spain. The shipwreck itself was first located back in 1993, but could not be positively identified. Older shipwrecks, it's quite hard. They don't have like a dedicated ship's bell with the name engraved on it, so it's really obvious what it is. And if it's like timbers, in those kind of waters, they start to degrade, so it's hard to see the overall shape and design of the ship. And in 2021, archaeological divers from the National Park Service's Submerged Resources and Southeast Archaeological Centres carried out a comprehensive survey of the site. Their discovery of 5 cannons, some 460 metres from the main wreck site, proved pivotal. Buried in the margins of old logbooks was a reference to the crew having, quote, lightened her forward after they had first run aground, and by reducing the weight on board, they had briefly succeeded in refloating the vessel before it sank in shallower water. Based on the gun's size, the features and the location, they were determined to be some of the 6 and 9 pound cannons that would have been jettisoned from when the HMS Tiger first ran aground. They want to lighten the ship to lift it up out of the water. Big, heavy cannons, just push them into the water, and but unfortunately the damage had already been done. So this discovery, along with the detailed re-evaluation of the main wreck site, where items such as cannonballs, anchor, and inscribed copper barrel bands were found, concluded the identification, and the team's findings have been published in the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology. Based in Cuba, under the command of Captain Edward Herbert, HMS Tiger had been pursuing Spanish vessels into the Gulf of Mexico when it grounded on a reef on the 13th of January 1742, eventually forcing the crew to abandon ship. The 281 men, including 5 commissioned officers and 57 Marines, spent more than 2 months marooned on the deserted island that is today called Garden Key. Battling heat, mosquitoes, and thirst, they repurposed some of the ship's timbers to build fortifications that 100 years later would become Fort Jefferson's landmark that now dominates the island. Other timbers were used to build vessels in bids to escape the islands, but in the end they managed to rebuild and float another nearby shipwreck, evaded Spanish patrols, and made a 1,125-kilometer voyage to safety in Port Royal in Jamaica. Like many other Dry Tortugas National Park dive sites, the wreck is said to be routinely monitored, but the positive ID should bring the additional protection offered under the USA's Sunken Military Craft Act of 2004. The HMS Tiger wreck and its associated artifacts remain Britain's sovereign property, but quoting, "This discovery highlights the importance of preservation in place as future generations of archaeologists armed with more advanced technologies and research tools are able to re-examine sites and make new discoveries." That was said by Josh Morano, the maritime archaeologist who led the team that made the discovery. So yeah, it is very cool just to... Okay, yeah, you can find these small artifacts, and individually they are quite interesting. But when you put it all in together with the overall narrative that was written down in history, you can identify them specifically, and yeah, it just builds that kind of story in your head, especially on dive sites. But yeah, if they're protected, obviously, yeah, you can't take souvenirs or anything. So yeah, it is just a nice, interesting underwater story. As far as new dive equipment and announcements, the only thing that I've noticed is that the new Mara's Puck 4 dive computer is starting to show up on websites. That's on scuba.com, and I actually have one for test with me, and it's a very nice dive computer. I was quite impressed by it because it's a budget dive computer, and usually they're fine. They get the job done, and it's a single button user interface, which is usually a turn off for me because there's only so many ways that you can press a single button. But I was honestly pleasantly surprised by the way that Mars have organized the menu structure. Instead of having lots of menu items all stacked in a row, and if you miss the one that you want, you have to spend time going all the way back round the list. No, it's actually really nicely organized, and I love the new styling of it. It's a very modern take on the previous version of the Puck, which is what the Puck Pro Plus, which is a bit of a mouthful. Now it's the Puck 4, comes in 6 colors, which are pretty cool, and yeah, just modern styling and detailing to it. It really is, honestly, a very nice dive computer if you're in the market for one. Otherwise, I don't think I've seen anything overly sort of exciting being announced or released. Yeah, that was mainly at the Mara's Puck 4. So on to some Ask Mark questions from the previous week. The first one, Ruerad Burglar 8514, I think is what's written there. Can we see a full review unboxing, please? Avatar Aeron dry suit. Yeah, I'll email Avatar, see if I can get a sample. I've tried out Avatar dry suits before, and they are lovely. They're very reminiscent of Santi dry suits, which are awesome in themselves. And the Aeron is like the most modern take, and I do love that it has the option. You don't have to have it, but you do have a single bright orange pocket, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's a smart dry suit. I don't. No, I've never tried one on myself, but from what I've seen and felt, yeah, they're very, very nice dry suit. But yeah, I can message them, see if I can get a sample. Ben X7067 says, for storage or transport, can I disconnect all my hoses, low pressure and high pressure, from the first stage and insert the plugs? It seems like it would be easier to transport and store all the stuff separately rather than attached. Yeah. The only downside to removing hoses is that it increases the chances of contaminants from getting into both your first stage and the hoses. If you're putting the port plugs in, then it's less of an issue. You'll never have, well, unless you do it yourself, you'll never have a first stage with all of the plugs filled. If you buy just a first stage by itself, they'll have most of the port plugs fitted except one, which will have something like a rubber plug. And that's just because if you put every single port plug in and for whatever reason decide to fit that to a cylinder and pressurize it, you'll never get it off unless you drill one of the port plugs out, because there's no way to relieve that pressure. So that's why you'll never get a first stage with every single port plug. As long as you fit a hose and a second stage or something to it, you'll be able to relieve the pressure. But no, if it's all port plugs, they'll get stuck. As far as the hoses, you'll need a lot of hoses when you buy them brand new. Just the hose itself, they'll have like a red either screw-on cap or like a rubber over cap that goes over the threads. Those are twofold. There for a reason. One, to protect those threads, because the threads are very, very delicate. Most of the metal on most like regulators is chrome plated brass, which is a very soft metal. So if you it's very easy to damage those threads, basically. So you'll have this little cap to protect the threads, but it also helps to get or keep contaminants out, like moisture and dust and stuff. You don't want them on the inside of your hose, like corroding or doing anything nasty. So yeah, as long as you are like protecting them, keeping them dry, then yeah, it does make your life a lot easier. Most of my first and second stages do get disassembled and stored in a drawer, just because, yeah, as you say, it's far easier to store them separated as opposed to fit and fully assembled. Even in a regulator bag, it makes things a bit cramped. So yeah, it can be done. You do just need to be a little bit careful that when you're reassembling them, that you don't damage those threads, because if you over torque it, you can strip those threads really easily, and that can be a very expensive game. And yeah, you need to be careful not to damage the first stage, because you're rotating that wrench. If you're not paying attention and the wrench is at an angle, it can scratch the body of your first stage, which is quite nasty. If you're using an adjustable wrench or an incorrectly sized wrench, you're using a metric instead of imperial for whatever hoses. Sometimes they're imperial, sometimes they're metric. If you use slightly the wrong side, you can like strip the nut. So as long as you know what you're doing and you're quite careful with them, yeah, it is perfectly fine. Just make sure that they're kept dry and contaminants out. But yeah, it does make your life a little bit easier for transport and for storage as well. Brian Smith 7706 says, how often do you get asked why your Superman t-shirts are backwards by non-divers? Yeah, so I'm wearing in one of my ask marks, I'm wearing the Fourth Elements. I think they just call it, was it Cave Arrow T or something? It was for when the movie Batman v Superman was being released and in the cinemas, and Fourth Element designed a cave line arrow in the shape of the Superman logo on his chest, and of course, it's inverted, so it's not actually an S. It is a cave arrow, but it's in the colorways of Superman with like the red and gold. They did a black and grey version for like the Batman, but it was still the Superman S kind of shape. No, the only comments that I've ever had is just like, oh, yeah, Superman and whatnot. They must just assume I'm a fan of Superman. I don't think people put that much attention into, oh, actually, no, it's backwards and it's not quite right. I don't think I wear it out too much in sort of public non-dive settings. So, no, I think most people just think I'm a Superman fan. DTT3426 says, if you buy a new regulator, does the manufacturer recommend a new second stage to go with that regulator? I see a lot of new first stage regs come with primary second stages. At least that's how they're displayed in the shop. But if you already have a primary and octo second stage, are they fine with the new regulator? Sometimes. There's a few reasons. The first one is most regulators or most first stages work or like function by similar means. They're going to take the gas pressure from your cylinder and then reduce that to an interstage pressure, an ISP, and that's what goes out to inside of the low pressure hoses. It's usually between 8 or 10 bar. It's usually around the 10 bar kind of range, but some regulators are less so. That's going to be your first problem, because on the flip side of it, on the second stage has a spring demand valve that is made to push against that interstage pressure, because that pressure's coming from the hose. It's always trying to get its way into the second stage, and if that spring is too strong, then even when you inhale, it won't open the valve, or if it's too weak, it'll just continually free flow because the pressure will be able to push against that spring and just get straight into the second stage. So unless your new first stage is pretty much the same interstage pressure, it kicks out the same amount of pressure as your previous one, then your second stage is likely to either free flow, which is fairly common, or it's not. You'll hear it rattle, and when you try to inhale from it or press the purge button, it might give you a little bit of gas, or it might give you no gas. That's not the end of the world, because it can just be tweaked by a technician. That's fairly easy. But yeah, trying to balance the first and second stages can be quite tricky at times. So it's a matter of yes, but it depends, basically. On the other side of things is like the warranty and the like standards, like EN 250 kind of standards kind of things. And whenever a manufacturer brings out a regulator, they have to put it through what's called an ANSTI test, where they effectively rig it up to a cylinder and they put it in a pressure pot, which can control like the water temperature and the water pressure, and they simulate breathing in different scenarios, and it basically has to pass this test to get its EN 250A or whatever. And that's expensive. The ANSTI test machine itself is expensive. They can like go to someone who has one and say, hey, can we like rent it? Can we borrow it for a bit to test our regulators? And then going through all of the EN 250 like tests and certification, it's expensive, and it's for every single combination. So with a lot of Mara's regulators, you'll have a one first stage, and that goes with that second stage. That's been tested. That's good to go. With Scuba Pro, I'm not sure if Mara's does this, but in my mind, I've always thought, oh, Mara's like do it this way. And Scuba Pro, again, I don't know if they still do this, but when I was sort of with them talking with the some of their new regulators, they said that they test every combination. So if you get a Scuba Pro Mark 25, it will work with or they've tested it with an A700, a S600, and S620 Ti, the G260, and the R195, I imagine. And they did every single combination costs them thousands. It's a very expensive endeavor to do that, so they don't always do every single combination. So if you're dealing with a current generation first stage and a 2 or 3 generation old second stage, you probably won't have that certification and testing, so it won't be covered by like guarantees or anything. So if something does go wrong, the manufacturer can come back and say, well, hey, you weren't using one of our like certified combinations. That's all on you, basically. We told you, we certified these specific combinations, because you use something different. Then yeah, I don't know. I imagine it probably voids the warranty. It voids this, that, and the other. It is just another way to get out of those kind of guarantees. So it's a matter of, like, mechanically, it probably will work. It might need a bit of tweaking as far as guarantees and stuff. Again, it might work. It just depends on the exact combination. So that's something that you're going to have to talk with the exact manufacturers and a local servicing technician. So it's kind of a yes with a little asterisk next to it. And To Knife says, I'm in the market for a new DSMB. I came across new white and black or orange and black models. Razor makes some, for example. Apparently they are easy to see under various circumstances, which makes perfect sense to me. They already really stick out on the product photos. Is there a reason to not go with them, like specific regulations that have to be a single color? Sort of. The closest thing to like regulations are in certain dive circles. The color of your DSMB has a meaning. So red or orange, it depends who you talk to, whether they're red or orange, is usually a location marker. So yeah, this is where I am. Whereas if you send up a yellow DSMB, that usually means emergency. So anyone on the surface will usually have organized this ahead of time. So if they see an orange buoy, they'll go, okay, that's fine. They're just doing their stop. They'll be on the surface in that location in X minutes. Just pay attention and keep an eye on them to keep track of them. If they see a yellow buoy, they'll start assembling like a hang tank and they'll lower it down next to the buoy, because, or whatever it is. So yeah, a two-tone, like a yellow and an orange buoy, can cause a bit of confusion, but all of that confusion can be dispelled by literally it before the dive to saying, hey, I dive with this two-tone buoy. If you see it, everything's fine, or everything should be fine. It is just my location marker. Some skippers aren't too fond on some of the more exotic color buoys. I've heard, I've never experienced myself because I don't dive with one myself. I've heard some skippers don't like black DSMBs. Black DSMBs were for a good amount of time considered pretty good because they stand out in quite a lot of like water conditions, especially very bright conditions, because it contrasts against if the sun is behind it and you're between the sun and the boat, it stands out. Whereas like a yellow buoy will just get lost in the sunlight. But yeah, I have heard tales of some skippers who won't take divers out if they use black DSMBs. I don't know how much truth that is in practice. The whole idea of these two-tone buoys is so that when they're on the surface and when they're moving around, they kind of give a flashing effect, because yeah, on one side it's black, on the other side it's orange. I know AP Valves did them years ago, and they probably still do them, to be honest. And yeah, as it just like turns and rotates in the water, you get black and orange or black and yellow or whatever it is. So yeah, you get this kind of flashing effect, which can help draw the eye and make it stand out a little bit easier. I'm not aware of specific regulations. There's always going to be like weird and wonderful regulations in like specific locations around the world. I can't say I've ever experienced them, but I just tend to dive with an orange DSMB. It gets the job done. Yeah, the main thing is just communication before the dive. Just let the other divers on the boat know, and the skipper and the crew and whatnot. Just say, hey, this is my DSMB. If you see it, yeah, it is fine. It doesn't have any particular meaning unless you want it to have a particular meaning. Yeah, just enjoy. But no, I'm not aware of any like specific regulations where you'll be like kicked off a boat. But yeah, it is best just to raise awareness and let everyone on the boat know that, hey, yeah, this is my DSMB. A little bit different. It's 2 colors. Yeah, and this is what I'll be diving with. And that's it for another week. So yeah, stay safe out there. For obvious reasons, it seems that every week I do the podcast and someone's dies in some tragic way. So if you are scuba diving this week, do be careful. Do be sure to check all your dive equipment. Make sure it's in like proper decent condition, and if you're ever unsure about something, it's best just to replace it. Like hoses are pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, just make sure you got plenty of gas in your cylinders, the conditions are right. If you're ever unsure about anything, it's better just to skip the dive, because yeah, I don't like reading sad news stories where people have lost their lives. But yeah, anyway, end on a high note. Thank you for listening, everybody. Remember to check out our website, scubadivingmag.com, our magazine, and yeah, we got the Australian Go Diving show coming up at it's September, so we've got some time to prepare, but we're getting more and more speakers being lined up, which is pretty cool. You can check that out on godivingshow.com. Yeah, otherwise, thank you for listening, everybody, and of course, safe diving.